In general, data can be encrypted or not encrypted. It's kind of just a choice, like a state channel developer will make. But basically, how about I'll split this into two things. So I'll talk about how I would envision or see, or how what I'm going to basically build for my first state channels, and sort of advice as to like how to optimally integrate this into an existing system. Optimally sounds like fucking the TV show Silicon Valley. Um, and then I'm going to talk about how our network actually works. So the system network for Constellation, and this is sort of like that, what I was mentioning, we're going to have like an AWS account for um, the Stardust Collective. So basically what we've done is we put together, it starts out that there's a load balancer that's publicly available, which then distributes data, sort of, obviously like balances it across all nodes. One thing that we noticed amongst the protocol actually, and this is sort of like, we thought that everything would work really well using gossip on the transaction layer. Turns out we actually don't want it on the transaction layer, we want it on everything else. And using an external process in order to distribute load across the nodes will also like really help greatly with performance. So just like any cluster, if you hammer one node with a ton of transactions, it's going to get overwhelmed. And also if you don't take advantage of the fact that like we have multiple consensus processes running at the same time, or rather, if you don't distribute the load, you don't take advantage of the parallel consensus happening. So that's one thing that really helped. As well as just making sure that external APIs and stuff are like locked down for us to maintain and keep track of. And then also, so then from that, there's a cache that we keep that basically keeps track of our nodes. And then the load balancer sort of sits on its own and keeps track of what nodes exist and then how do I reroute them. Obviously, then the cluster sits right there. And then the nodes periodically, after we reach like a finality window, where we can guarantee that the state is aligned across all nodes and it's accurate and correct. Then the data gets sent from disk directly to S3 in an external store, where then that's processed into the block explorer, which is accessible again from some public APIs that the Molly wallet uses. As well as we have some extra, just jobs that actually need to finish writing, which will periodically, basically run through that data across all the nodes and just make sure everything is like kosher. And then we'll probably tie that to like some kind of PagerDuty or on-call thing that will be there. So that's the full system architecture, and sort of if I were to break that down again, basically that is also very reminiscent of how one would build like a streaming data pipeline. So let's say that you have a streaming data source from whatever socket or HTTP or something. You would then pipe that into something like in the most canonical case. I'm just going to talk straight out of what's his face's book, Big Data, because he's the guy who created Storm, and it's like everybody knows that. Sorry. So then you distribute a bunch of nodes, which then all the data comes from your source, and then it repartitions the data across nodes, where each node has its own responsibility. So in our system here, we can actually think about the whole cluster of nodes as being like one node that's sort of processing a certain data type, if you will, in the network topology. So if that didn't make any sense, I'm happy to write that out as well. And also, so from the perspective of like building your own state channel, you really need to think about how can I build a let me just assume that I have a magic wand that can add some measure of cryptographic security or some kind of visibility, if you will, into my cluster without having to think about it. Okay, we have a wand, build your system, and then basically what we want to do is break down at each individual component, like where are there vulnerabilities towards like forgeries in data or corruption in data. Our stuff is not necessarily just for malicious behavior, but from malfeasance as well. So that's kind of the idea, and the goal here is that you should be able to slap a node into any part of your pipeline, and depending on how what your pipeline looks like, there will be examples I'm going to give over the next couple of months when I'm actually when we're knocking out the state channel full API thing, that will demonstrate the kind of topology you'll want for your call graph and for the actual pipeline itself. Sorry, that was